Have you ever stood in a room full of flowers and realized the sweetest smell there was a lie? Have you ever been handed an inheritance that looked like a gift, only to feel the trap close around your wrist the moment you touched it? My name is Evelyn Hart, and before my aunt tried to bury me under a crumbling house and a stack of polished lies, I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the woman who worked, waited, and believed loyalty would someday be returned in kind. I am an architectural historian and a licensed preservation consultant in Charleston, South Carolina, a city that knows how to hide rot beneath beautiful facades. Maybe that is why I should have seen my family more clearly sooner. We looked respectable from the outside. Old name, good manners, polished silver, private schools. But inside, we were all cracked beams and water damage. At my grandmother's funeral, the air was thick with lilies, candle wax, polished wood, and expensive perfume. Vanessa Cole stood near the casket in black silk, pressing a handkerchief to dry eyes that never once looked broken. Her grief was flawless. Her timing was better. Beside her, her husband Martin wore the calm smile of a man who already believed the paperwork was done, and my cousin Olivia stood a few steps back, scrolling through photos on her phone until someone looked her way. Then she arranged her face into sorrow. I had spent years being the good niece, the useful niece, the one who worked too hard, asked for too little, and mistook endurance for belonging. So when the guests thinned out and the family lawyer pulled a folder from his briefcase, I still had enough hope left to think I might hear something honest. Instead, Vanessa placed the deed in my hands and said, soft as prayer, "The Briar House is your fair share. Evelyn, your grandmother wanted you to have something meaningful. The lawyer would not meet my eyes." Olivia glanced at the property photo and let out the smallest amused breath. Martin rested a hand on my shoulder and murmured, "You should be grateful you were left anything at all." I looked down at the image of that decaying old mansion, at the edge of Charleston's historic district, wrapped in damp fog and dead ivy, and something cold moved through me. I knew enough about buildings to see what they were not saying: back taxes, structural decay, insurance exposure, legal liability. This was not a gift, it was a disposal. And while Vanessa and Martin drove off to celebrate by the river with a bottle of something expensive, I stood in the funeral quiet, holding the transfer papers, staring at my aunt's sharp signature, and understanding one thing with absolute clarity. They thought they had buried me with my grandmother's secrets. They had no idea that night was the first spark. That night, instead of going home to grieve, I drove straight through the Charleston fog to the Briar House, with the transfer papers still sitting on the passenger seat like a dare. The iron gate groaned when I pushed it open, and the house rose out of the mist exactly the way I remembered from childhood summers, only sadder now, more exposed. The porch sagged. Dead ivy clung to the brick like old resentment. When I stepped inside, the air hit me at once: damp plaster, old dust, mildew, and the faint metallic smell of rainwater that had been finding its way in for years. To anyone else, it was a ruin. To me, it was a body with good bones and a long history of neglect. I ran my fingers along the cracked banister and felt the shape of workmanship beneath the decay. The Briar House was not worthless. It had simply been left to rot, the same way I had. I made my way to the library, the one room that still felt like it remembered how to keep secrets, and opened my laptop on a desk coated in gray dust. My hands were steady by then. Grief had cooled into something sharper. When I logged into the state licensing portal, I found exactly what some part of me had already feared. Martin had used my digital seal, my electronic signature, and my professional authentication code to approve documents for Harbor Crown Residences, a glossy glass and steel waterfront development on the Charleston Harbor. The first file made my stomach drop, then came the second, then the third. Safety approvals, a forged foundation assessment, a historical facade preservation clearance I had never signed, and then an email to investors sent in my name, assuring them the site met every structural and preservation requirement. I just stared at the screen, feeling the cold spread through my chest. They had not only taken the $1,680,000 that should have protected my future, they had turned me into a legal shield, a polished credential they could hide behind if the whole project failed. If anything went wrong, my name would be the first one burned. I thought about the years I worked 3 jobs to stay in school, while Olivia celebrated her luxury engagement weekend in Napa. I thought about every time I was told the family needed patience, sacrifice, understanding. Then I stopped thinking and started acting. I revoked my digital authorization. I filed correction notices with the licensing board. I triggered an identity misuse alert, tied to every permit carrying my credentials. The system moved faster than emotion ever could. Within minutes, their construction insurance was flagged, their credit line was frozen, and compliance alerts began going out to their partners. Near midnight, my phone lit up again and again across the dusty desk. Martin called 12 times. Vanessa finally texted, "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I looked at the message, then at the blue light of my screen, reflected in the dark library windows, and said nothing. Because for the first time in my life, I understood that I was not the family's spare anymore. That was the night the final audit of the coal empire began. And once the first freeze hit their accounts, Vanessa did exactly what people like her always do when control starts slipping. She went public before the truth could. 2 days later, I sat in the old kitchen of the Breyer house, with my phone on speaker, and listened to her voice pour through the room like perfume over smoke on a local podcast called Low Country Business Circle, a show Martin had quietly funded for years. Rain tapped softly against the warped window glass, and the kitchen smelled like rust, old soap, and damp wood. Vanessa sounded calm, wounded, gracious. "Evelyn has been struggling since the funeral," she told the host, her voice trembling in all the right places. "She's trespassing on family property, removing heirlooms, and trying to damage a legitimate development out of personal resentment. She even filed a complaint with the professional board, claiming I had abused my credentials and become a risk to the public." By noon, a local business site had already run a short piece using my name beside the phrase "professional misconduct," and before the afternoon was over, an old client emailed me one line that felt colder than any insult. "Is it true you're under investigation?" I tightened my hand around a coffee mug until my knuckles went pale, but I did not call Vanessa back. I did not defend myself online. I had lived too long in a family where the loudest lie usually won the room. I was done performing. That was the day Daniel Mercer arrived, the restoration specialist I trusted, because he cared more about structural truth than social theater. He was quiet, precise, the kind of man who studied a wall the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. We were in the butler's pantry pulling away water-damaged paneling when his pry bar struck something metallic behind the studs. "Evelyn," he said, stepping back, "you need to see this." Wrapped in oilcloth and blackened with age was a small iron box tucked deep inside the wall. Inside were 4 narrow ledgers, a little brass key, wire receipts, offshore account numbers, shell company names, and copies of withdrawals marked in my grandmother's handwriting. On top sat a folded note in her hand, "If you are reading this, they have gone too far." My pulse turned slow and heavy as I followed the numbers line by line. The full trail was there, the missing $1,680,000 siphoned from life insurance, trust funds, and converted assets, with payments tied to Olivia's Amalfi Coast wedding, a penthouse deposit, legal retainers, and zoning lobbyists. Then, tucked into the back of the last ledger, I found a business card, Agent Nolan Pierce. When I called, he answered on the second ring. I gave my name, and after one brief silence, he said, "I've been waiting longer than you think, Evelyn." That was when I understood my grandmother had not left me a ruined house. She had left me an archive of war. And from the moment I heard Agent Nolan Pierce's voice, the story stopped being about a bitter inheritance and became something colder, larger, and far more dangerous. He met me that same afternoon in a small federal office that felt stripped of anything human: no windows, no decoration, just gray walls, a steel table, and fluorescent lights that hummed like they were tired of what they had seen. Nolan did not waste time trying to comfort me. He opened a thick file, slid on his glasses, and told me his unit had already been tracking suspicious transfers tied to coal heritage development for months. "What you brought in," he said, resting one hand on my grandmother's ledgers, "is the piece that turns suspicion into action." Then, he started laying out the architecture of the fraud, and for the first time, I could see the whole structure instead of just the cracks. Vanessa and Martin had never legally married, not because of romance or rebellion, but because the family trust favored direct bloodline descendants. On paper, Vanessa remained the rightful daughter. In practice, Martin ran the operation from the shadows. Funds were moved under preservation expenses, estate maintenance, and legacy protection, all of it dressed up in respectable language meant to survive casual scrutiny. But the ugliest truth was waiting deeper in the file. My parents' insurance beneficiary forms had been changed while they were both unconscious in the ICU. The power of attorney attached to the paperwork carried forged signatures, and, according to Nolan, even an older physician had been pressured to blur the timeline around when those documents were supposedly validated. I felt the room tilt for a second, not from shock exactly, but from the brutal confirmation of something I had sensed for years and never had the evidence to prove. Then I remembered the small brass key from the iron box. Nolan sent an agent with me to an old downtown bank, where the key opened a safe deposit drawer under my grandmother's name. Inside was a hard drive, scanned documents, original emails, and a short audio recording. When Nolan pressed play, my grandmother's voice filled that sterile room, thin but steady. She said she was afraid they would erase everything if she died first. I had not heard her voice since the funeral, and it cut through me more cleanly than grief ever had. Nolan let the silence sit for a moment before saying, "This is no longer an inheritance dispute, Evelyn. This is wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, grand larceny, and obstruction." When I stepped out of the building near dusk, I saw Olivia sitting in a black car across the street, sunglasses on, motionless, watching. That night, Daniel found fresh scrape marks near the back door of the Breyer house, as if someone had tried to force their way in. That was when I understood my family was no longer trying to save face. They were panicking, and there is nothing more dangerous than people who can feel their empire starting to crack. And once I realized they were desperate, I knew exactly what desperation would make them do next. Turn the last pieces of my grandmother's life into cash before the law could close its hand. 3 days after Harbor Crown was frozen, Vanessa and Martin staged an estate liquidation at the Wentworth Grand Hotel. All chandeliers, polished marble, and soft piano music, the kind of room designed to make greed look elegant. They laid out my grandmother's silver, paintings, jewelry, and antiques beneath warm golden light, as if this were some gracious family transition instead of a last-minute extraction. Charleston's polished elite filled the ballroom with low voices and lifted champagne glasses, pretending not to notice the panic underneath the performance. Olivia floated through the room in a cream dress, smiling at guests as though nothing in her world had cracked. I arrived exactly on time, dressed simply, carrying nothing but the calm they had never been able to understand. Vanessa crossed the room the second she saw me. Her smile never reached her eyes. Leaning close, she whispered, You've already ruined yourself, Evelyn. Don't bury the whole family with you. I looked at her, at the diamonds at her throat, at the perfect mask slipping around the edges, and answered, family? You keep using that word like it isn't just the name of a shell company. Her face tightened, but before she could answer, the auctioneer lifted his gavel over my grandmother's 19th century silver tea service, the one she promised me when I was 10. Then, the ballroom doors opened. Agent Nolan Pierce walked in with federal marshals at his side, and the room changed temperature. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Nolan's voice cut clean across the silence as he ordered the sale halted and the property secured pending seizure. Evidence tags appeared where place cards had been. Velvet displays were sectioned off. Vanessa went pale so fast it was almost startling, then instantly reached for my hand with both of hers, transforming herself into the grieving matriarch again. Please, she said softly, urgently, think about the family name. We can settle this privately. I pulled my hand back and placed 3 documents in front of her. The forensic audit, the disinheritance codicil, and the asset freeze order. Then I told her the only truth that mattered. Our family name died the moment you forged my parents' signatures in that hospital room. Martin lunged forward in fury and was restrained before he got close. Across the room, Olivia's mascara streaked as her composure finally gave way. 6 months later, Vanessa and Martin were convicted, and Olivia sold off the luxury gifts, the handbags, even the car, trying to keep up with legal costs that never could have saved them. I used the recovered funds to restore the Briar house with Daniel, not into a monument for myself, but into Briar Justice House, a place for survivors of financial abuse, a place where history is preserved and truth is given a voice. And if you have ever been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one expected to keep burning so everyone else could stay warm, hear me clearly. Your silence was survival, not weakness. Walking away from people who feed on your light is not betrayal. It is the beginning of your life. My grandmother did not leave me a broken house. She left me a foundation, and for the first time I built a home where I was no longer the extra person in the room,